you're welcome too. But Ambassador Acharya, would you mind taking that? Unfortunately, we can't. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashokji. I was not expecting to speak, but after listening to such a stimulating discussion and a wonderful presentation from Ian and discussant, and I thought I should make a few comments. I'm not going to speak about the government's position on the Secretary General's report, which I did this morning in the Security Council just after Karen did. But I will be speaking on behalf of Nepal's peace process. One of the things that was not highlighted in this discussion is the uniqueness and the capacity of the internally driven peace process to succeed sometimes at the last moment under duress and under pressure and hard deadlines. But our leaders, our peace process has demonstrated that capability. And as you know, our peace process is like 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. But you're still moving 1 step every step of the way. So in order to move ahead, you need to see certain setbacks. Some colleagues in the United Nations keep asking me, what happened to your peace process? It was going so well. It's supposed to be one of the big successes in the world, but now it's going to be fail. I ask them, no, you should ask the question, is it going to succeed? This should have been the question here as well. And I keep telling them, it happens in the case of a good game of soccer or football, if you have seen it. There is sometimes, even in a good game of soccer, there is an intermission, change of sides, some foul play. But as long as the rule of the game is the same and the players are the same, we should wait till the result is over. I think we should wait till then. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what I want to do is first, invite Ian back. You don't have to get up. Maybe having heard, 4 people now commenting or responding or adding to your comments, if you have anything you want to respond to.
Only on one factual point, which is that the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, the Speaker, recognized from the beginning the danger that it would be obstructed as a constitution-making body by antics in the legislature, and in fact the two have been separated in their functioning from the outset, so that although most recently the Maoists are blocking the function of the Assembly as a legislature, nobody is blocking its functioning as a constitution-making body. Now, that's not to say it's making good progress as a constitution-making body. It isn't, but that is for reasons other than formal obstruction. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. If you want to ask a question, please come to the front. Mainly because we're video recording, and unfortunately we don't have these mobile mics, so you'll have to come to the front. Please. If anyone on this side, they can come here.
Too many shy people here. I would add Kul Gautam to that list of praise that he gave to Ian and to Deepak. Kul was such a highly respected member of the United Nations and has been a friend of mine for about 30 years. I have 2 questions, but the preface to the question, or the footnote to the question, is continuity with the monarchy as opposed to disjuncture. His Majesty Birendra was a beloved figure, and thousands and thousands of Nepali signed the condolence notes at the time of his funeral. Is there a transition from his belovedness to the current situation that could be capitalized in the peacemaking process? And has his coronation proclamation of Nepal as a zone of peace had any impact upon the internal situation? I know that externally there were something like 116 nations that signed it between 1975 when it was proclaimed and 2001 when he was assassinated. Thank you. Oh, I might add that Birendra was a student of mine at Harvard.
Anyone wants to comment?
That's a question for a Nepali.
Go ahead.
Professor, having read your book, I would quite disagree with the assessment that you had. The outpouring of grief that you saw in 2001 was, I would say, a case of mass hysteria. Mass hysteria. Birendra certainly was not a very controversial figure like his father or his brother were. But in terms of university revered, I certainly have my doubts. I lived in many parts of Nepal when I was younger, and I really did not feel that people. Yes, there was a sense that I mean, it's a very difficult question to comment on. But the fact that throughout my different stays in the villages, you kept on coming across communists of various varieties who were hell-bent on getting rid of the monarchy even then. I'm talking about the 80s. Certainly points to the fact that Birendra was a non-controversial figure. More than that, I seriously have my doubts whether he was well loved.
Thank you.
If I may add
Go
just
ahead.
one point. I was not there when Birendra was ruling. I was outside the country, so I do not have a first-hand experience on how he was perceived. Just one comment on the idea of the Nepal as a zone of peace. I think that was a wonderful idea at the wrong time. I hope that one day, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, we will revive that idea. And I hope that one day we will become like Costa Rica, a country without an army, really committed to peace. Because we are between China and India. Forget who brought the idea, because nowadays people detest the king and monarchy. But the idea itself, that Nepal should one day aspire to be a zone of peace, that we will be without an army, we will allocate all of our resources for human development. That's a beautiful idea. It was the wrong time at that time, because this was an idea, as you know, 116 countries accepted it, but the most important country for this idea to work, India, did not accept it. So it became useless. So we need to create a situation where first and foremost our neighbors will accept it, then we go on, and I hope that one day we will become a zone of peace. That is a dream that we must all cherish.
Thank you. Please identify yourself so that people know who you are.
Yeah,
before you ask.
Ahilan Kadirgama. I'm from Sri Lanka, but been always interested in what's going on in Nepal. A question generally to the panel. What's changed outside of the political parties and the Maoists? So, from 2005, when we look back, a lot of things happened that was unexpected, such as the upheavals in the Terai, that new social and political forces emerged. In the last 2 years, has there been any such change, at the social level, one? And then in terms of the external actors, and particularly India, what has been the changes that have happened that could be contributing to the deterioration in the process at the current moment?
Ian, you want to?
Looking at it from the kind of peace process perspective, I mean, there is no question that what started out as a peace process between a state and the rebels fighting against the state has been enormously complicated by the entry into the picture of social groups asserting themselves and not seeing their interests represented through the Maoists, even though the Maoists had sought to present themselves as the representatives of those interests, or indeed the other political parties. Obviously, that's most obviously true of the Madeshis, because they've become the largest single independent, bloc independent of other political parties in the Constituent Assembly. But it's true of the self-assertion of different groups, and that is going to make the task of constitution making very much more difficult. But it is, of course, what restructuring the state was always supposed to be about. But you still sometimes hear people talk as if the new constitution can be put together at the last moment the way the 1990 constitution was, a final negotiation among a very small group of people. I don't believe that can be done now. I think handling the building of sufficient consensus around the new constitution to ensure that it wins sufficiently broad acceptance and is not the source of other rebellions or violent movements of disaffection, I think that's a huge challenge that is still ahead. So from that point of view, the process has undoubtedly become very much more complicated. The second part of your question I also had something to say about was
external actors such as India and the impact of the process.
There was a very widespread assumption that an early Constituent Assembly election would see the Maoists in third place. It would mainstream the Maoists, quote unquote. It would legitimize the parliamentary political parties again as the main actors in the state. A lot of the anxiety was whether the Maoists would accept the result of an election which they would, it was assumed they would lose, how to keep them in a process even if that came about. And that's why the result of the election was so traumatic in many ways to many people whose assumption was that things would take a quite different course, and that's true of external actors as well as being true of the parliamentary political parties, and some of the continuing difficulties still come back to that. Partly that's seen as, this wasn't a fair. I mean, firstly, it's important to say that the Maoists are not entitled to see the result of the Constituent Assembly election as a validation of their ideology by a majority of the Nepali people. Clearly, it's not that. They won 40% of the seats in the Constituent Assembly on the basis of around 30% of the vote. And that included the votes of many people who wanted to see change and saw the Maoists as the party that might bring change and was sceptical of the ability of the other parties to do so, but certainly were not ideologically identifying themselves with the Maoists, and may indeed in some cases have voted for the Maoists because they thought that was the best way to consolidate peace as well as bring change. So there's still, to some extent, a psychological adjustment going on to the reality of how major a force the Maoists represent in Nepali politics, I suspect for the future, on the part of traditional political forces in Nepal and on the part of external actors.
Before, I think, why don't you come here? But I just want to make a quick, just to add to Ian's comment, and also with due respect to Ambassador Acharya, I think I agree with Ian that the idea that Nepali politicians, at the 11th or almost 12th hour, can come together and cook something up. I think if this were to happen now with respect to writing the Constitution, I think that kind of thinking, if it continues, I think it's going to be disastrous. That is precisely why, the Constituent Assembly elections were held, and it's unfortunate that the CA process has been totally undermined by the very people who think they can pull that kind of trick together. I think the country will experience, in my judgment, talking to all kinds of people, in the past couple of years, I think a serious challenge. I hope, if we can send the message that process as much as final outcome, I think here the process really matters. So that should be emphasized.
Hi, thank you for organizing the event.
Identify yourself, please.
Yep. My name is Gyanu Sharma, and I'm a student of political economy at Fordham. I think it's very apt that the event is organized at the India-China Institute, because those two countries seem to be very active in Nepali politics. Even at his address to the parliament when he resigned, I think Prachanda also pretty much clearly mentioned that the cause of his demise of his government was Indian interference. I was wondering if the panelists had any opinion on that and could further clarify the position India takes on Maoist being in power. And also, that could be extended to China as well. And my second question is, around that same time, there was a lot of reporting in Nepali media about possible coups and counter-coups that were going to take place. And I mean, that brought up a lot of questions about how media was acting to disseminate information or create a certain political climate conducive to certain actions. So if you had some comments on the role Nepali media is playing as well, that would be really good. Thanks.
Excellent questions. Ian, you want to start first?
It is an excellent question, and there are several people in this room who could answer it much better than I can, both in terms of their knowledge of the precise nature of intervention of various kinds in the build-up to the crisis and in the construction of the parliamentary majority for the new government after the crisis, and who know more than I do as to what justified or didn't justify the sort of extreme media accounts, either that the army was on the verge of staging a coup, or conversely that the Maoists were on the verge of state capture, which were the sort of the two alternative views. So, I mean, I actually would encourage others. I wasn't at that stage in Kathmandu, although I've heard a lot from a lot of people since then. But people like Prashant, Aditya, as well as Deepak and Kul could better answer that question than I could.
Deepak, do you want to respond, or anybody? Kulji?
No.
Okay.
If I could just say one thing. Because after you should address that maybe also as maybe also a question. What struck me, I don't think anyone will know exactly what India's role is in the overthrow of the government or in the role of the president. What is really struck me is that they could put together a coalition outside of the Maoists. That was really surprising, because it took a lot of doing. And there, I think, would be interesting if they could address the question of how that was possible. Because I thought, well, okay, they forced them to resign, but how are they going to put together a government without them? And yet they did it. And there, I think, an outside role could have been pretty useful for that.
Kulji, before
I'm not sure if it is how direct an answer it is. On the role of the media, my understanding is the following. I am delighted that Nepal has a vibrant media. All kinds of points of view come. And yes, when some points of view come, there will be some exaggerated views on that side, there will be exaggerated views on the other side. They balance each other out. And what I find wonderful, you go to Nepal's villages, you listen to those FM stations, you get diversity of views. So I do not, frankly, if you are saying, oh my God, media plays a terrible role, not at all. Let the media be vibrant, let them point out all kinds of extreme views, medium views. That's good for Nepal, good for democracy. I don't know what role it played at that time. Whatever role it played, media should be vibrant, multiple points of view. That's a good thing. On the Indian interference, again, I do not know what interference, how much there was, how little there was. But the fact is, we all know in Nepal, India is the easy time. Anytime something happens wrong, but it's India's fault. And, of course, if India supports us, that is good. If India opposes us, you see Indian interference. That's exactly what happened. Prachanda said that, or implied that foreign forces had colluded and we're not going to accept anymore the Bideshi Prabhus, etc. But guess what? A few days before his resigning, he was meeting with the Indian ambassador every 3-4 times he had specifically requested that Shiv Shankar Menon come. So was he seeking Indian support? And he did not get it, and the other side got it? I don't know. But there's that.
My question wasn't that there isn't
That's his
Indian
job.
interference. My question was why the pressure exists in some, like, as it's expressed in actions. I agree that there is Indian and Chinese interference in Nepal, but I wanted to know why they were so adamant against, say, the Maoists, or could be other forces as well. So my question was more like why, and
I would not know that.
Well, I really would. Is Prashant still
Yeah,
here?
I wish Prashant was here. he had to leave. He had to-
Aditya, come on, we have to speak honestly.
Yeah.
About
Come on,
this,
Aditya.
and I'm not the best person to do it.
Aditya, please.
I mean, I'll do it by reference first of all. I mean, read the International Crisis Group report, Nepal's Future in Whose Hands, and you will find quite a detailed account there of the nature of external intervention, and I think you also should not equate India and China in this respect. The nature of the intervention is radically different. The other thing is I want to disagree with Kul about the media. There are major points of view that are barely represented in the Kathmandu media. The point of view of Madeshis is not represented in the Kathmandu media. The point of view of the Maoists is not represented in most of the Kathmandu media. The Kathmandu media largely ranges with the odd weekly on the fringes, but it largely ranges from the sort of reasonable pluralism of the Kathmandu Post and Kantipur to a view that Ashok, I think, would describe as that of the elites, if I can use his language. So I think we need to be a little franker about this.
Yes. Yes, Aditya.
I think I want to say two things. The first thing is that when the political space in Nepal becomes fragmented, the possibility of intervention increases because one actor wants to play wants to play India against another actor, so India can extend influence through them. If the political center is more united, it's more difficult for India to penetrate. The second thing is, when you speak of Indian interference, it's not India coming in and dictating a certain policy direction. Yes, I mean, there were certain Indian strategic concerns in what they did, but it was very largely influenced by a certain domestic constituency within Nepal, which convinced it of the rightness of certain actions.
Thank you, Aditya.
My name is Sugam Pokhrel. I work for EL Talent. It's a public relation firm in New York. My question is for Mr. Martin. As we all know, the role of UNMIN came under fire when the video got leaked, where Prachanda says we've basically fooled UNMIN by exaggerating the number of armies and the number of weapons and everything. So, and after that, many top leaders of top political parties they are like questioning the credibility of UNMIN. As unfortunate it is, but they are. So my question is, what lesson, if any, have UN learned, not just from this incident, but the whole role UN played in peace process and the conflict resolution? Thank you.
Firstly, let me make a general point. The role of UNMIN was relatively uncontroversial as long as there was a reasonably high degree of consensus of the political forces in the implementation of the peace process. Since that consensus has broken down, everyone wants to use the UN in what has become a partisan argument, so that everybody wants. An example that I think is quite interesting at the moment is that there was apparently discussion in the government or in the 22 parties of taking to UNMIN the alleged breach of the comprehensive peace agreement by the Maoists in Dankuta. I don't know exactly what the Maoists have done in Dankuta, but the UN has absolutely no role in the general interpretation of the comprehensive peace agreement. At the same time, UNMIN has been criticized for saying that new recruitment by the Nepalese army, or indeed by the Maoists, is a breach of the agreement and the arms monitoring agreement, whereas I quoted, the UN has an absolutely specific responsibility to rule on compliance under an agreement entered into by the parties. Now, some people don't know this, other people know it, but their interest is in seeking to score points against their political opponents by seeking partisan use of UNMIN. But to go back to your question, which specifically related to verification, the criteria for verification were not to work out who was an original core member of the People's Liberation Army. They were who was in the Maoist army at the time of the ceasefire in May 2006 and was over 18 years of age. Those were the only criteria. The core Maoist army was generally, I mean, if you look at what the Nepal army itself said on the record, around 10,000 in mid-2005. There was a decision in the Maoist party in October 2005 to create 7 divisions as part of their last attempted effort in the last stages of the armed conflict to surround Kathmandu, and at that stage they brought into their army people, many of whom had probably been militia, some had been political cadres. These lines were not very firmly drawn always in the Maoist movement. So by the time of the ceasefire, there were the core PLA, and there were a lot of people who had relatively recently entered the Maoist army, but who were, in terms of the agreements, to be, qualified to be in the cantonments and verified by UNMIN. But then when the cantonments were set up, as I referred to, they brought in a lot of people, many of them kids, to to further expand the cantonments, leaving UNMIN with an extremely difficult task of, as it were, sorting this out. When UNMIN began verification at the first cantonment site, we disqualified 40% of those in the first cantonment. The Maoists were furious. It was the stage at which the Maoists most publicly attacked UNMIN. What they then did after that, when verification eventually resumed, was moved a lot of them out themselves rather than suffer the embarrassment of their being disqualified by UNMIN, where to, I can't exactly tell you, many almost certainly into the YCL. So then, when we completed verification, we were down to 19,600 from the 32,000 who had been in the cantonments originally. That 19,600 is significantly more than the core PLA, and some PLA stayed out and took leadership positions in the YCL, as I referred to. But the sort of general assumption in the Kathmandu debate was that the Prachanda's reference in the Shaktipur address to whatever it was, what was his figure, 6,000 to 8,000, is to be compared with the 19,600 that UNMIN verified, whereas I say what he spoke of was perhaps roughly corresponded to the original core PLA, but there had been additional recruitment of people who did qualify to be in the cantonments. Now, all of this, none of this would have been a major matter of contention if the parties had got on and proceeded with integration, because even in the Maoist expectation, it was only some of those core PLA who they were ever looking to include in the Nepalese army. But with the general fraying of the process and accusations and counter-accusations, it has become a matter of greater controversy.
Thank you. Last question. I think so, Will.
Hi, I'm Arisha Suwal, and I'm studying Masters in Public Administration at Columbia. I had, I don't know, I'll ask one question. I had 2 questions, actually.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I can't help but get a sense that there's a greater expectation of compromise from the Maoists. So it seems that Maoists have to continuously prove that they're committed to the democratic process, whereas the other parties, it's assumed that they are already, committed. So why is there this greater, why are the Maoists expected to compromise more than the other parties? And then the second question is, Mr. Deepak Thapa, you mentioned about how dangerous it is that the current army could become is already an autonomous entity. And so I'm just wondering, like, how dangerous can it be? Like, what are the chances of a military coup? And, because I'm reading a lot about Congo, and then sometimes, like, I get scared about, like, military coups happening, and then and the situation is similar where political parties are weak, and or rather, like, political parties are weak in terms of uniting. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Arisha. Yeah.
Well, I think maybe everybody should respond to that. I think Deepak made a very important point when he said that the Nepalese army is now the strongest force, and I myself made the point that the army is less accountable than it was when it was accountable to the palace, whatever you think of that kind of accountability. And in any society, if an army is not subject to democratic control, if the politics of the country fray, then the chances that the army plays an increasingly political role and steps in is there. So that's perhaps the reason for my reference to saying that democratic control of the army is a common interest of all democratic political forces and should not be seen as a Maoist agenda. And I think one of the most unfortunate things is the way that the lines became drawn between the parties, almost as if whether you were for or against the Nepalese army, not whether you were for principles of democratic control. That again subject, and I made the point, to democratic control not meaning politicization and partisan control of the army. You asked the question, why are the Maoists expected to make the greater compromises? Well, of course, if a violent movement comes into a democratic process, one is entitled to set the expectations high as to their transformation. And as Kul indeed has said, and was a part of my own presentation, but I do think there is a tendency not to look at the full nature of the agreement that was struck that brought the Maoists into the process, and to say equally that the responsibility of other parties to fulfill their commitments and to accept that there was a commitment to change, and that commitment to change is one that was validated by the Constituent Assembly election.
If I could,
yes, Andrew, go ahead.
If I could address it,
You're the last.
I didn't notice in your speech actually that you wanted more from one side than the other. So I actually thought that was really interesting that you made demands to both sides. In very short remarks, I actually try to be particularly even-handed in the sense of making one thing for each side. I think that's the right way to proceed, to in fact say, I mean, this is the largest party in Parliament. I don't care about what Bhattarai writes. That's a message to their militants, and we have to disregard that. But I think to make demands of both sides, fairly parallel ones, is the right way to go, and they both should be asked to make important compromises. I think one thing that is probably, even in this audience, will sound strange, and people don't really ask for it. I think we have to ask the ethnically based, identity-based movements to make a lot of compromises as well. I mean, in our contemporary atmosphere, where multiculturalism and ethnically based identity politics have become, so important to everyone, and we're under the aegis of so many Canadian theories. Canada is a very special country, and has advantages that Nepal will never have. we tend to think that there's no problem with a country being divided along, for example, ethnic lines. I think for Nepal that would be a tremendous problem, and I think right now you mentioned something about not being able to exclude those forces anymore, and of course they cannot be excluded. But I think to really force them to accept ideas which are important from the point of view of a Nepali public interest and not the interest of each and every small group would be tremendously important. By the way, their demands are self-contradictory mostly because they want redistribution, but at the same time they also want very, very high levels of autonomy, and those two things are not compatible.
Hi, my name is Parul. I used to go to new school. More than that, I would consider myself friend of Nepal Army. It's because I find in Army generals, yes, previously Royal Army, currently Army, I believe in democracy. So the thing with it is, I find that the Army generals now have become so diplomatic that I find them that they don't defend themselves. They're a great institution only because the Nepali politicians are so incompetent that when army unites, it seems like, oh, they are this force that is so united, so good. They might be autonomous. It's not that. It's Nepali politicians are so incompetent that they seem so good. I don't think. I really believe. I grew up in the army with the army family. My father was in the army. I grew up with all the army soldiers. I don't think they want to sit and dictate, become a coup, have a coup. Why would they want a coup in Nepal? No army general wants that sort of a headache. It's actually a headache. So and I feel like, like just here, we have a black president, and then they say it's such a big deal. It's a historical event. We have a Gurung CNC chief now. That's a big, big thing for Nepal Army. Yes, there should be, I think that there has to be a greater way of incorporating wider range of people from every sort of strata, more women. Of course, we want more women. We want women chief in the army. But I don't think it's fair to say, oh, only the Maoists should be. I believe that Maoists shouldn't be integrated in the army because it has to be from the lower level, but in a different way. Then tomorrow, if I have a party and I have all these people behind me, should it be fair for other political parties for me to say I want my people to go inside the army? I mean, I think it's not right. And I don't think Nepal Army is so, it's just one kind of, I think civil society in Nepal is more like one kind of people. Army is actually not, especially the newer kind of army. I mean, I remember having every sort of people in the army. I remember meeting people from every area of Nepal, every Gurung, Rai, Tamang, Chetris, Gurung, everyone. So, and yes, there should be more, but that's wrong to say that it's not, and they're changing.
Deepak?
I hate to disagree with you, but I'm sure you didn't meet any Madhesis out there. You didn't meet any Dalits?
Oh, I did. That's generalizing to say I didn't meet any. Yes, there should be.
In the army?
In the army. And I can even give you the name. I can tell you where it is. I can tell you where his house is.
Well, let me respond to you.
And I ate the food he gave me too.
Wow, that's great.
It's not a matter of opinion.
I think
Thank you.
Having a Gurung as the army chief does not really fundamentally alter the character of the army. The Gurung's wife is still Rani Sahib, and that is where the problem is. I think that what we need is a redefinition of what the army should be like and what its relation to this to the Nepali state should be. So long as the army is the only institution where it is. Where can I start with the army?
Go ahead.
I come from a similar background, but. The language of the royals has actually disappeared from the palace. There are new palaces that are coming up, that's something else. But the army is the only place where you have the language of the royals still being used, and it's institutional. And there's something fundamentally wrong with an institution that is so feudal and that refuses to accept the fact that, take the example of Katuwal's refusal to accept Madhesis. And it is, you talk to any of the people out there, you talk to generals, they say, our doors are always open. We've never excluded the Madhesis. It's they themselves who don't come. It's not in their culture. to fight. And why do you have an army in the first place? To fight against possible war against more Madhesis, i.e. Indians. You have a situation that, I mean, I accept the fact that the army looks different. It's because of what the politicians are like. It was a very, very dangerous game that the politicians were playing by egging Katwal on to take on the Maoists, not realizing the fundamental point that Ian is making, that it is in the interests of all the political parties to have the army under their control. Because an army that is not under their control is an army that can do anything. And I would again beg to differ with you on the question of that the army does not want to have a coup. There has not been any army that has said that it wants a coup. The Pakistani army didn't say that. It was forced into a coup. That's how they've justified.
15 times.
They've always said that. You know, it's in the national interest that they do it. They never do it for themselves. King Manda didn't take it for himself. He took it in the national interest. And the possibility, I'm not going to speculate on whether there is going to be a coup or not. But then what is true is that the Nepali army is very strong now, and the point that was being made yesterday at another meeting was that with the removal of the monarchy, and we have this two-pillar theory of India, multi-party democracy and the monarchy, and a point made by an Indian journalist, I think rings very true, that this is the second pillar now. The monarchy is out, and the army has become the second pillar. You have multi-party democracy, and you have the army. And that is, I think, a very dangerous thing, to have the army as a counterweight to multi-party democracy.
Well, it's 8 o'clock, and I'm sure people are very hungry and have other plans. And I just want to really thank Ian Martin again for giving us a lot to think about, and also the three discussants for joining us and adding really important insights. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone.